Okay, so we're going to start just with the overview of all the equipment and the components. So just to start, this is our metabolic cart. So obviously quite a bit different than what you've seen over there with the stationary cart. It's quite nice in a sense that it's very compact compared to like even the K4 where there's a lot of external components to it. Now the battery is built in. The barometric pressure, temperature, and humidity probe is all built in as well, so there's no like entering of values like you would with the Parvo cart, and there's no obviously plugging in of that probe. It's just built into the system. And so the system has like what we call like a light version of the software built into it. So you can run everything off of the K5 without even having a computer, but ultimately, like to get the data out of it, you're going to need the computer component of it. I will pass it around just so everyone can see, but I just wanted to kind of cover the components here at the top real quick. So right here, it's labeled in green. That's where the flow meter will plug into, and everything is labeled, so you shouldn't really have too much trouble. It says flow for flow meter. We have the inlet for this PermaPure sampling line to connect to. Right here we have the USB, so to connect it to the computer. And then we have the power supply connection right here. So even though there's a built-in lithium-ion battery that can be taken out to be charged, if the battery's sitting in it, you can plug the unit in, and it'll allow you to warm the system up while it's also charging the battery. So in case you come in and you want it to warm up and charge the battery, that component isn't separate, so that's nice. The system has a built-in receiver for Garmin monitors. You can use some polar monitors in them. I don't think we have a spec on which monitors in the manual, but there are a couple polars that can be used. But the one that it comes with is a Garmin, and it's coded, so it's automatically just going to register to this guy, so there shouldn't be any issues with that. And then right here, this little mushroom cap goes over our FiO2 sampling circuit. So basically what happens is every 5 minutes when you're running a test or when it's just sitting here, it's going to draw in the room air basically, so that it can see whether or not that the atmospheric CO2 or O2 is drifting. So it can basically kind of reset that baseline because this analyzer is based on a chemical reaction, not a physical reaction. So the sensor can have a tendency to drift if it didn't sample the environment every 5 minutes. So it's just happens in the background. You're not going to notice it happening. It's just going to happen. And then it has the O2 sensor that can be removed. So this guy, the O2 sensor will need to be changed every year. And that was something we spoke about. It's just part of the year. The sampling line, it's super important to, so basically today with this guy, we opened it, pulled it out of the plastic. Essentially the biological timer started. So like we could run 0 tests and in 6 months the line will be bad. Or if we run 100 tests in a month, the line is also going to be bad. So whichever comes first, 6 months or 100 tests. And those are just both really important things to keep up on in terms of like, making sure that your data is good and the system's calibrating appropriately and all that. Just so be mindful of those dates and make sure that when it needs it, you order that stuff in advance. I'm going to go ahead and pass. I don't think you guys should ever have an issue with like the environmental conditions of use. It can operate within spec up to 15,000 feet or 4,900 meters or so. So no issues there. The humidity specs are between 5 and 90%. So when you get up to the very low end, you can have electrostatic discharge issues. And if you get over 90%, what these lines do is they basically, well, not only are they drawing a vacuum into the analyzer to measure the CO2 and the O2, but they allow humidity to move out of the line. So when we expire air, it's always 100% humidified. The analyzers don't want the humidity to be over 50%, and it wants it to be stable. So if there's no pathway for water to move out of the line, it's just going to saturate the line and saturate the system, and your data is going to start looking really good. It's drizzling out. You would just want to be mindful of like what the humidity is, because like it can be raining and not really be at 90%. But yeah, you just want to be careful with that.
It doesn't get very humid.
Yeah, I was gonna say, so that's not really a problem, but if it is drizzling outside, the system is splash resistant. Don't try to cover it with a backpack or anything like that, because CO2, it exhausts gas out of the bottom. So if it's in a backpack, it's gonna fill that little backpack up with CO2, and when it samples out of the FiO2 circuit, it's gonna be drawing in a bunch of CO2, and it's gonna throw off your system count.
So then does this cap stay on during
the cap stays on, yeah, and it just draws air from underneath.
Okay.
Yeah.
Unless you're going to go back to it.
I was
Can
going
you
to ask
just
that.
elaborate what you told me about this clear line?
Yeah, so obviously the system can be used as just a stationary system as well, and it has a clamp, so if you wanted to clamp it onto the treadmill or the cycle ergometer in front of the subject, you could do that. The only thing that you would have to be mindful of is if the unit is in front of the subject that's expiring CO2 rich air, you would want to plug in this sampling line onto the top of that FiO2 circuit so it can sample away from the subject, so it's not drawing in a bunch of CO2 rich air. So you would just essentially remove that mushroom cap, and you would stick this guy on top.
And then the other end you just place somewhere where it's
You
getting-
just like let it hang out like
Got
away.
it.
Yeah. In like very dusty environments. So like, I mean, it's fine if you're in an open field and there's some dirt and a little bit of dust gets kicked up, but if it's like super high winds and there's like a bunch of dust in the air and stuff like that, you might want to be careful too, just because that open air circuit, even though it's covered by this mushroom cap, you don't want dust to get sucked in there. There are filters that prevent dust and dirt from entering the sampling circuit, but those filters can get clogged, and then you'll have issues with calibrating and obviously running tests, and then the filters need to be changed. Move on to the battery stuff. So you get about 4 hours of battery life. It can vary a little bit depending if, it actually really depends on the amount of breaths and the level of ventilation that the subjects are doing, because you gotta think the higher levels of ventilation, higher levels of VO2, the more it's gonna stress the analyzers, the more power it's going to draw, essentially. And it's about 2.5 hours of charge time. And they are considered like a smart battery, lithium ion. So like after it's every 100 cycles, it reduces its capacity by 5%. So it's kind of like an iPhone or just any Android. You wouldn't want to leave these cells plugged in and constantly receiving power, because it's going to essentially deteriorate it even further. So when they're fully charged, make sure to take them off the charger or unplug the unit, because I don't know if you've like had an older iPhone where like over time you're like, this thing does not hold a charge anymore. It's kind of the same concept. Like everyone leaves their phones overnight, even when they're at 100%. It's not good to do. So just avoid that. You want to make sure that both or your batteries sufficiently charged before testing. You don't want to run into the issue where you have to change the battery mid-test. You're gonna lose the data essentially after it dies. Like you'll have everything saved up to the point in which it dies. You could get the new battery in and continue testing, but it's going to give you an error message basically saying that optimal warm-up time hasn't been achieved. You can kind of disregard that in a sense, because it has been warmed up, it just got shut off, and there's nothing in the code that tells it like you were just on, you know? So or built into like the firmware to tell it. You were just on. So it will give you the error message like, hey, you still have 58 minutes left before you can calibrate it. If you're switching the battery out, just wait. Say it took you 3 minutes to change it. Just wait 3 minutes before you continue and run your calibration again. Continue testing.
Yeah.
It's gonna say you need to wait 58 minutes before you calibrate and start testing again.
Okay.
But you can disregard that because you've already calibrated.
Yeah.
And you just put a new battery in. It's just the system doesn't know that.
Okay.
So if you run into that, just know that I don't need to wait another 58 minutes.
Okay. You'll still be able to log data fine.
Yeah, it'll be fine.
Okay.
Oh yeah, and then, so this is the charging station here. And so the batteries just sit plugged right in on top like that. And so basically when it's plugged in, you'll get 3 different lights. Blue will be flashing if it's plugged in and receiving power and still charging. Green will indicate that it's plugged in, receiving power, but it's fully charged. And red is indicating some sort of power supply error. So it's not charging, but it is receiving power. So pretty straightforward. When it's plugged in, it'll light up. And like I mentioned, it takes about 2.5 hours to fully charge the batteries. And so that's this setup here. But then here, like I mentioned before, you can plug the K5 with a battery in it directly into the wall. It's going to allow you to power on the system while charging the battery as well.
So if we take a battery, and charge it the day before data collection, and then unplug it once it's fully charged, so we don't just let it go, can we just expect that, within a day, or how many days essentially can we expect it to be at like full battery before it kind of?
It shouldn't really deteriorate much at all. Like it should be kind of like a brand new phone if you fully charge it and just put it in a desk and don't even touch it. Like it's gonna take a long time for that power to deteriorate.
Battery to the ground and it turns off. We've lost data collected up to that point. Or
No.
Okay.
Just it obviously won't pick up any
from
more
that
data.
point on.
Yeah.
Okay. Up to that point is saved.
Yeah.
Anything after that is not.
So if it was like, it'll start beeping at you when the battery gets low.
Okay.
And when you're in testing mode, it's gonna say remote control and then battery percentage. And so if it started beeping at you and it was like 3%, you could be like, oh shoot, like if you had this and you were inside, you could be like, okay, can you sit down real quick, plug it in, and you can let it charge for a little while, like just if you really needed to. But obviously, just making sure that the battery is efficient before you test is the best way to go.
Thank you.
So what's kind of a little interesting about the way that this is set up is that you can run everything standalone without the computer, or you can run everything through the computer, either Bluetooth or with it plugged in via USB. The only thing that you can't do with this system through the computer is calibrate it. So it has to be calibrated directly on the device itself. So before we even connect to the software or do anything like that, we'll just start running through calibrations. So if we're going to be testing inside, there's going to be more calibrations that need to be done than if we were only testing outside. And so what that looks like is you're always going to calibrate the flow meter first, just because it's separate from the analyzers. It doesn't have anything to do with the analyzers. So you'll calibrate the turbine first, and then if you're testing indoors, you're going to want to run what's called a CO2 scrubber. So CO2 levels in this room right now are not at atmospheric levels. I was measuring them just a little bit ago, and they're actually at 0.09. So you want to make sure that the system knows that what the 0 point is, and then it can refer to its default, which is 0.04, and then it's going to know the difference that basically the analyzer's reading from atmospheric to the ambient CO2 levels within that room that you're in. And so if you're outside, we know that CO2 levels are always stable at 0.04, so you don't need to run the scrubber test. And so that
So
would
in
be the
here, you
difference.
said it's 0.09, you tested it?
Yes.
Okay. So if we're doing a test outside, we have to calibrate outside.
You want to calibrate outside.
So don't calibrate it here and then take the device outside.
Yeah,
Got
or vice versa.
Right.
Yeah, because that would actually be worse, that if you calibrated it outside, didn't run a scrubber, and then came in here, likely your values will be all funky because all of a sudden it's going to be measuring baseline CO2 higher than what it calibrated at, and that's just going to throw your measurement off.
Would the 5-minute like ambient air sampling help account for that in any way, or?
No, because it needs a 3-point calibration for it to know the discrepancy from default.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's where you start running into issues. Yeah. Okay, so to just cover the analyzers real quick, the CO2 analyzer is a digital infrared analyzer, so it's going to be pretty much the same thing that you got in the CPET over there. And so that's why like the calibration is so important, because of the way that the sensor takes its measurement. So basically an infrared light bulb receives light onto a photoreceiver, and the more CO2 in the line, the more light is absorbed, so the less light that's actually being received on the photoreceiver. And then, the less light that is received, more CO2, more light, less CO2. So you can see how that can throw off the calibration or the measurement if the calibration wasn't done accurately. And then the O2 analyzer, it's called a galvanic fuel cell, so it's based on a chemical reaction, and that's why every year it needs to be changed, because essentially that cell just becomes exhausted over time. And so what happens is the system applies like what's called a gain to the measurement. So over time, it just can't apply enough of a gain to get an accurate reading on the measurement, so the cell just needs to be changed. Okay, so timing for calibration. So you don't need any time to pass at all to calibrate the flow meter. It's just 0 minutes. You need 20 minutes of warm-up time to do the CO2 scrubber. If you're going to run the dynamic mixing chamber, it's 30 minutes of warm-up. If you're going to run it in strictly breath by breath, it's 60 minutes of warm-up. So just be mindful of that. So the dynamic mixing chamber, it's essentially just like running a mixing chamber like if you're running a Parvo cart, or like our stationary metabolic cart, obviously with the mixing chamber.
We don't have that.
Oh, you guys
We don't have a mixing chamber.
And it's called dynamic because it's just a miniaturized version, and so like the calculations and the way that it takes its measurement is all the same. It's just calculating it based off of a much smaller mixing chamber.
Not this big.
Not a 7-liter mixing chamber, which is actually, in a way, it's got a higher level of accuracy, because you got to think how many breaths it takes for the CO2 levels to change in a 7-liter box versus like in a tiny dynamic mixing chamber. It's similar to breath by breath, but smoothing it out just so it's a little bit more like user friendly to like interpret the data and stuff. And the reason for that is the 60-minute warm-up time for breath by breath is just because the sensor is going to be stressed way more during breath by breath, versus in the mixing chamber it's going to be receiving like every other breath, so it doesn't have to analyze as quickly. It's not stressed as hard.
But that's for, you said for elite athletes, which we will rarely be using mixing chamber.
Yeah, so like breath by breath mode is the specs. It's like the breath by breath mode is certified up to 6 liters with like to be within the accuracy level that we claim for the O2 analyzer being 1 to 2% and the CO2 analyzer being up to 2%. So 6 liters, and I was explaining to Julie before, my boss used to be an elite cyclist, and we were just looking at one of his tests recently. His relative VO2 was like 86 mLs per kg. It was 5.5 liters, and he was 140 pounds. That's like Olympic level cyclist, and he still wasn't quite pushing 6 liters. So you might not really run into too many people that are going to stress it that hard. But just for the sake of like, kind of the peace of mind knowing that everything is going to be like super smooth no matter how elite of a subject you have, just run it in the dynamic mixing chamber mode. That's kind of like the way that I kind of explain it, it's just like your average population, just run it in breath by breath. Your elite performance athletes run it with the dynamic mixing test. So we will start plugging stuff in. So you guys can get a little closer here and see. So green to green, and it's labeled, so that should be pretty straightforward. If it's not sliding right in, just rotate it, and it'll find its slot and rotate in. This is just like a lure lock, so you just stick it on and it'll just turn freely. It won't put any tension in the line. And so, like I said, the first thing we're going to do is calibrate the flow meter. And so right here, we're just going to the calibration tab. And the first thing we got is flow meter. So we hit flow meter, and it's not going to tell us anything. It's just basically going to say start performing the strokes when you're ready, and you'll just go ahead and do that. So we're using the same guy as we do for the stationary cart. And so this is the adapter you need to do the calibration. And so that just spins on like that. This won't all fit together like nicely unless it's all three pieces. It'll stay just kind of loose. Just like that. And like that. And then just go ahead and kind of like pump it just like a medium speed. These turbines are super linear. So like with a pneumotac, for example, that would be used on like a parvo cart, you need to hit the certain levels of flow because pneumatacs aren't linear in the way that they take their measurement. Which is another thing super nice about this because you guys got the AB/AV adapters to use antibacterial filters while exercise testing. So since you're not going to be washing these between tests, it only needs to be washed every month. And so that means you actually don't really even need to be calibrating it between each one of those tests because you're not going to be washing it and potentially introducing something that could damage it. And that's because they are super linear that they're able to do that.
So if we start, sorry to interrupt, but if we start using the filters on the cart, that's the same, then we wouldn't have to calibrate every time?
Yes, correct.
Okay.
Yeah. Just to explain a little bit more on the turbine,
Yeah.
I know you guys are probably already pretty familiar with it, but it's a bidirectional digital turbine. So it's got the little fin in there and, it's able to measure ventilation based on the revolutions per minute, and then the direction of spin knows whether it's inspiring or expiring. And this is the actual reader. So it's got photo receivers and light diodes that, essentially like the lights get interrupted and that's how it knows it's spinning a certain direction. So that guy's pretty straightforward. So it just said calibration pass. It's just a pass-fail criteria. So we'll just go ahead and hit the green check. We're good to go. We're going back into calibration, and now we're going to do the CO2 scrubber. And it's just going to say connect the sampling line to the scrubber. So you're just going to take that guy, plug it right in there, and let it just hang out. And it's just going to run, and same thing, it'll tell you, it'll beep at you when it's done, and same thing, pass-fail criteria.
Is the orientation of this tube particular, or can you?
No, I just don't want it to, you don't ever want this line to get kinked, so you don't ever want to hold it in a position where it might kink the line.
While that's running, so like we're not familiar so much with using that cap, which you mentioned before.
Yeah, so the wind cap, it only comes with one wind cap, and the reason for it is just to prevent, if you're outside and the wind's blowing, it to like introduce error into your ventilatory measurement.
Okay.
We do make other caps, and the cap that you got probably with the CPET is probably just an open cap.
Well, we have one of those in the cupboards, but we've never used it.
Oh yeah, I mean it's just
Indoor.
it's really just for the K5 for outdoor testing,
got it.
but it's not going to interfere with anything with your. Okay, so the calibration passed. So Now we're gonna go back in, and the last thing that we have to do is a reference gas measurement. The only thing is, if we're gonna calibrate in breath by breath, because it's gonna ask us when we do the gas cal, are you calibrating in breath by breath or are you calibrating in mixing chamber mode? If you do it in breath by breath, it's gonna automatically include the delay. So you don't need to do anything there. But if you're gonna do a mixing chamber test, you have to do the delay manually. And basically what the delay test looks like is it just wants to establish a baseline of inspiration and expiration. So it just wants to make sure that tidal volume, it can average tidal volume and get an accurate measurement. So I'll show you what that looks like. But again, like if you do breath by breath, you don't have to do anything with that. We're just gonna do a mixing chamber because it's pretty much the same. We're just gonna have to do the delay manually so I can show you what that looks like. So we'll go mixing chamber. It's first gonna have us just let this guy hang out so it can sample and flush the analyzers. So this is our gas tank. Very nice with the K5 because the regulator is set to only have one output pressure, so nothing ever needs to be adjusted. This valve is going to always stay open, and you just control the flow by just turning this nozzle. And this is just telling us the total amount of pressure that's in the tank. They come standard with 2100 PSI. This guy has about 2000. It's pretty much full. Again, it just depends on how much calibrating and testing you do, but I typically say that these are good for about a year, year and a half. So it says connect the sampling line, turn the gas on, you just turn it on, and stick that guy right in there. Calibration passed. Good. So just pull that guy out, turn that off. So the calibration would take a little longer if it was breath by breath because it would have added the delay in there. So we're gonna go back and we're gonna do the delay now. And so this part is, so if you weren't using antibacterial filters, you would want the subject to do this because if you have to breathe through the circuit, so like there would be a cross-contamination issue there. But with antibacterial filters, I'm gonna just do the delay and obviously take the filter off and then somebody else can use it, so that's fine. But in the instance that you didn't have an antibacterial filter, you would wanna do this with your subject and have them perform the delay, so, you know, the cross-contamination thing. And so what's gonna happen is it's just flushing the analyzers now, but then it's gonna give us like a synchronized beep, and it just wants you to inspire and expire every time it beeps.
So much faster.
There we go. Calibration passed. So we're good to go. So essentially we'd be ready to run a test if we wanted to do it in mixing chamber mode, but we want to be ready to do everything. So we're going to go back to reference gas, breath by breath, and delay. And we don't need the filter anymore, so we'll just let that guy hang out.
So it's using the delay calibration you just did?
No, it's not. It's just establishing its own. Yeah. It's just that with the dynamic mixing chamber, you got to think that it's not measuring the breaths exactly the same so far.
You said you get about a year out of the tank?
Yeah, with a high level of testing, with lower levels of testing, kind of 18 months, even a little bit longer.
What happens if you fail a calibration? Restart?
Yeah, you'd want to rerun it and just kind of double check, make sure that you have gas, make sure the sampling line obviously is within spec, make sure the O2 analyzer is within spec, just kind of double check all your stuff. And if it fails twice in a row, then that's kind of just call me.
Got it.
Okay, now let's collect the sampling run to the regulator outlet.
In terms of like cleaning things and exposure to bacteria,
Mm-hmm.
do we need to like wipe that down? It doesn't matter.
No.
It's not really.
Yeah, because it's like this part is drawing a vacuum through it, so like nobody would ever be like rebreathing anything that got pulled into it, and
Okay.
especially because you guys are going to be doing the antibacterial filter setup,
Uh-huh.
like there's nothing with COSMED's metabolic carts that are considered critical in terms of like the Spalding scale for disinfection.
Okay.
It's all like semi-critical stuff.
Mhm.
So yeah, and that's really only the turbine, because the turbine is what is coming in direct contact with any
everything.
respiration, mucous membranes, that type of stuff.
Okay.
And then the mask itself.
Okay.
Turn this guy off. So now it's going to calculate the delay, and that was good as well. Perfect. So we're good to go in terms of calibration and ready to run a test. So what we're going to do now is we're first going to open up the software and everything, and I'll show you guys how all that connection works. But then essentially we're just going to be setting up the subject and running the test through the K5 itself, and then I'll show you how that data import and everything happens. So we will get started there. So right here, obviously this isn't your guys' computer, or my baby
Yeah.
wouldn't be on it.
Actually, it might be good while we're on camera to say why, after multiple attempts, we could not get it to run on a Stanford encrypted
Yeah,
computer.
so any system that's encrypted by a school or a hospital network we 100% of the time run into issues with those computers. It's either because IT didn't give the administrative rights, or whatever firewall protection that is associated with that school's network doesn't recognize our non-Windows native application, so it can't be installed. And since the computer wasn't purchased by COSMED, we can't really do any further troubleshooting beyond. Actually, the first thing before we enter the software, when we run a system using our Bluetooth device to allow us to do telemetry mode with testing, you have to disable the internal Bluetooth card of the laptop itself. Because it interferes with this generic Bluetooth device. So the first thing, and I'm gonna remote in and do all this for you, but
Okay.
just so we have it on camera and we
Yeah.
know the workflow of it. So the first thing you would do is on the computer, come into the device manager, and you can see here that I've disabled the Intel wireless Bluetooth radio, and that's this computer's internal Bluetooth card. And right now it's only recognizing this COSMED K5 device.
Okay.
When you plug this guy in, it has the driver included in it, so it automatically downloads the driver onto the computer. So there's no issue there. But if you don't disable that Bluetooth, you will never get the device to connect. So that's a big one, because like when we first developed the device, we didn't realize that that was happening, and it took us a while to figure it out.
Okay.
So yeah, so those are disabled. So we know we're good there. We're just going to open the software.
Take a picture of the device
So COSMED Omnia, that's going to be our software. And so the first time that you plug the K5 into a computer, it is going to need to be plugged in via USB because the license for the software to be used is read by the device. But once it's plugged in once and reads the device license, then you don't need to plug it in anymore. Okay, so this is the user interface here. The first thing we would also be doing to connect to the K5 is we would come into the utility, we would go to device manager, and right now it can only be connected through 2 ports. So when you see K5 with the serial number, that's the option to connect via Bluetooth, and USB, obviously the option to connect via USB. After you've already established Bluetooth connection, you don't need to continuously do it. So like right now, it's showing us the K5 with the serial number. All we do is select that, hit save, it's gonna connect. But the first time you do it, you're going to need to hit discover. A window's gonna pop up. It's automatically gonna find the serial number of the device. Once it's done searching, you click on that, click pair. This is gonna pop up just like this. Once it's already established it and that's already there, if you try to keep connecting through Bluetooth Discover right here, it's gonna freeze and crash. So what you do is you either click USB or the serial number and you just click right here, show. Connecting to the device. When the serial number pops up, we know we're connected. And that was via Bluetooth. If I switched it to USB, I would have to hit show again. Serial number will pop up. We know we're connected. So we're good to go there. We'll just hit save. And the way that we can know it's connected for sure through the Bluetooth is we could come back here to quality control. We'll hit the control panel and we will hit start. And it just stopped it, and it's going to put it into remote control mode. And so now it says remote control, tap to terminate the test, and it gives us the battery percentage. And now we're reading in real time measurements from the device, mostly just environmental factors. So that's good and fine. We could just hit stop here. Exit. And so if we were gonna run a test in here and we wanted to watch the data in real time, what I would do is I would now come to database and I would enter in my new subject and I would run my test from the computer controlling the K5. If we weren't gonna be doing that, we were gonna be testing outdoors, I would just eliminate the computer portion, come to the K5, and we would come into test, and we would enter new subject and we would do it all that way. So since that's the more difficult way to do it, that's how we're going to do it, because then once we transfer in, it's automatically gonna populate here. And obviously this is straightforward enough to like add a new subject, do a new test. It's gonna be a little bit more complicated doing it through here. So we will start doing that. Let me just go back. So back to the home screen, we're now going test. And we're going new subject. Who's gonna be the volunteer to get this strapped on? Okay. So I'll just have you enter all your information here. So it's really, I mean, it's just like a phone, you know, you tap on each line, keyboard pops up, enter in the information. So I'll let you start getting your hands on that guy. Just hit X on that. It won't let you just type and just erase. So. And so one thing that's super important here is if
You're good. I can be.
say for example, like he's entering in his subject card, he's creating himself a subject card right now. When we import from this device to the software, it's gonna create a permanent test card for him. It's gonna have all his visits, all the tests. You wanna make sure that if you were to have his card here, you're going to always erase the database on the K5 when you're done with it.
Mhm.
So if you go to enter in his subject again,
Won't be there.
it's not going to be there, but you want to make sure that you entered it the same time as you did the first time, because when you go to import it, it's going to now create 2 subject cards instead of
Okay.
mirroring them on top of each other.
Sure,
And
sure.
so like name, height, weight,
Has
all
to
that
be
has to be
exact.
exact same.
All has to be, the height and the weight can change because obviously their weight and all that can change, but the first name, last name, date of birth,
Has to be-
ethnicity has to be the same.
Got it.
Yeah.
Can you merge 2 cards on the computer if they?
You
are-
can, but it requires you to export one test out and then re-import it back in to recognize it. And obviously if it doesn't merge together, something's not the same. So you have to go into one of them and manipulate something, export it, re-import it.
Mhm.
Yeah. So we're gonna go breath by breath. May have jumped the gun. It's probably gonna already want to start sampling. Yes, we did. So we're gonna go back, but basically right now it's already ready to start collecting data.
Mm.
It's at 0 up here right now, and the timer's not going, and this is flashing at us. As
Mhm.
soon as it starts picking up some data, the timer's gonna go.
Mhm.
This is gonna keep flashing for 2 minutes. And the reason for that is it's just a washout period. So if I wanted, so say he started breathing into the circuit, values came up normal immediately and looked good, I can just hit start, it's gonna reset the data, start recording. But if I just let it run for 2 minutes, it's automatically gonna reset everything and start recording. So typically you just let it run because you're just gonna let the person kind of relax and, you know, like kind of get ready. And so you just, typically you get elevated VO2, elevated RQ, elevated heart rate. You're just trying to get that stuff to trend down to as close to baseline as possible and then start recording your tests. So we're just gonna exit out of here real quick.
So on this device,
To the data, because if there's ever a discrepancy in your data and you were to send it to us,
Yeah.
we would be like,
what's our baseline?
yeah, where's your baseline? Like we can't really do anything unless they were just so wildly outrageous values. But we would always ask you guys for rest data because the rest data is actually going to point out problems a little bit easier than exercise data will.
And it's how many?
But typically like a 5 to 10 minute rest period is good.
Usually do 5.
Yeah. Okay. So we have his subject card and everything entered there. So let's just get him set up to put it on because we're going to start collecting data basically.
Okay.
Yeah, let's do it. With your guys' CPAP, the only thing different is it has the inspiratory valve punch outs. And basically what they do is they just reduce resistance with inspiration, but they aren't really effective until ventilation gets to about 100 liters per minute or more. So they're really only for like elite athletes, whereas like if you're testing like a chronically ill population, like they wouldn't even help.
Mhm.
And even just like smaller subjects who don't move a whole lot of air, it's not gonna help them in comparison to like the one without the punch outs.
Okay.
And the thing about these also is like you couldn't do an exercise flow volume loop with these because when you're inspiring, not all the air is passing through the turbine. So you won't get an accurate flow volume loop measurement anyway. So I don't know if you guys are familiar with flow volume loops. No? So basically, a flow volume loop is just like your standard force vital capacity loop, right?
Yeah.
You would do essentially a force vital capacity test, and when you first start the test, you have some normal breaths that give you a volume loop of what tidal volume breaths look like. You get what's called dynamic hyperinflation in diseased populations, populations
Like
with
that,
COPD and that type of stuff.
Okay.
And so a flow volume loop will just show how tidal volume is essentially changing over the course of exercise because subjects' residual volumes are increasing, so they have a harder time moving air. And so that can cause subjects to start hyperventilating prematurely during exercise. And but again, that's like something you get in like a disease population, and that's why the K5 is not really set up to do that. Even though when you are running a test through the software, it does give you the option to do a flow volume loop. They're just not going to be accurate.
Okay.
So just be mindful of that.
Okay.
So we are going to do it with the adapter. And so this guy is going to come out. The adapter is going to go in. Just like that. And then our new filter here.
So our other masks don't have those.
So you can
So-
use them. That's what that looks like with the AV adapter. It's a kind of a lot, but not as bad as the snorkel with the non-rebreather valve. Yeah, so pretty straightforward. The only thing is when you are running a test with this guy, it is going to, when you're doing longer protocols, you got to be careful because this guy will get very saturated with water over time.
How long is long?
Like you probably wouldn't want to be testing somebody for over an hour.
Okay.
Yeah. Because this guy will just start getting really filled up with water, and then the resistance to airflow will be will increase over time, and then you could potentially get excess like water soaking into the line, which is going to make it harder to buffer off that.
And so you're saying an hour of exercise, but if they were doing like 5 minutes of running and they had 5 minute or a 3 minute rest and then another 7 minutes of running.
It's like if they're heavily or if they're breathing heavy for extended periods of time for about an hour, obviously it's like you got to just kind of take it subject to subject, but
Okay. But you can just take it off, right?
You could, yeah.
Okay, and
Yeah.
then just put it on when they're ready for the next exercise set.
You could. It just, again, with protocol and stuff, like if you're continuously running, you're going to get obviously a big dip in your data, and then you're going to have it come back once they put the mask back on. So
I see.
that
Depends on your protocol.
depends on your methods of your protocol.
Okay.
Yeah, but some people will run a test and then stop the test and then have them take off the mask, do what they're going to do, and then run a new test. So there's just two clean, separate data sets.
Yeah.
But then, yeah, you can always hit pause on the system and then have them take the mask off and hit it again. But again, like there's always going to be a weird little like step in your data, like unless you timed it perfect to where ventilation and VO2 is like exactly the same when they get back on it, which is not really going to happen. So gear and everything. Are you
Like COSMED mask, I guess, but
So this is, you would think that kind of like your underwear, that the tag can go on the inside,
It's
but
opposite.
that's not true. It's red to head. And, the small hole is for a ponytail, so you know that that's on the bottom, and this is the outside. So just like that. And I typically just like to get the two top ones on and then fold it over their head and adjust it while it's on them. So I'll just have you grab the mask, put it where it feels comfortable. So just hold it there for me, and I will get it all strapped up. Might be a little tight already. looks like it was like nearly perfect for your head. Obviously shave, but if they don't want to shave, then baby oil just to flatten it down as best you can. Or you could always use Vaseline, like if there's a place that you think that there might be a leak, you could put some Vaseline around that area so it just kind of sticks down. Obviously just shaving is best. And so like the best way to leak test it, obviously we can only push air out because it has the inspiratory valves. So you wouldn't want to just push down on the mask because you could occlude a leak that's there. So just hold it from the side like this, cover it, and have him try to expire and see if it like has that good suction. So I'm gonna go ahead and push out. So good suction, sounds like it's on there pretty good. So we're good to go. So before we strap it on, the last thing that we gotta do is just get the backpack on him. So it's a one size fits most type of deal, but I've never gotten it on someone this small, but they said that they've gotten it on like a female athlete that was like 5'0" and like 90 pounds. And then you can adjust it to get it on the smaller children with the other waistband that's under here. Yeah, it's just sitting right down there. It's the other waist belt. But we only have one size, so you could potentially be limited with some really small subjects. Okay, so just go ahead and put that on like backpack. Perfect. Here's going to be your main straps here. Oh, sorry, these are going to have to come. Here. And then this part comes across here, snaps on like that. And then these, bring these shoulders down a bit tighter. Does that feel okay?
Yeah, that's fine.
The other backpack setup was quite a bit more difficult. This one's just like a real backpack, so it fits on pretty nicely. How does that feel? Pretty good?
Yeah.
Pretty tight?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm gonna have you turn around so we can see how this back part goes. Lift your And so you see the two little lips that are popping up there? Those are gonna go inside of those two holes. And then obviously the screw is gonna screw in there. And then we have the band that's gonna hold it down. Heart rate belts, they work really well. They just need to be wet. A little bit wet, yeah. Like on these guys, just so they got good like connectivity. I wonder, do we have like just a little water we could put on there? I typically just step through it and pull it up and then tighten it. So if that works for you, you can just step through it and pull it up.
Same on that anyway.
You can put it on like a belt.
How's that?
And then it goes where?
It goes right over like your xiphoid process at the bottom of your sternum.
Okay.
Right
Right there?
Yep.
Yep.
Okay.
Pretty good. Okay. Last piece. I'll have you turn that way so the unit can still be facing her. So all of his subject data, that's where we left off. We're just gonna hit OK. And so that last place where we left off, where I went one step ahead, was just choosing the modality of measurement. So we'll just get all this set up first. So I don't really like the way that these two lines are on the opposite side of each other. So what we'll do is turn it so they're lined up. That, and then like that. Have those guys spaced down, and then the line. Slide right through there so it holds it in place and keeps that back behind him. And we're going breath by breath.
So this is that 2-minute timer.
Yes. So we'll probably just let it run. So it's doing its 5-minute calibration right now just to sample the environment. And again, it's fine that he's wearing the mask because that came from our FiO2 sampling circuit. Looks like we're picking up heart rate. So on the K5, I forgot, it's not giving it. In Italy, they thought that they would create a middle ground for exercise physiologists and nutritionists. So an exercise physiologist will say RER, nutritionist will say RQ. They're like, let's just call it R. It's like, we're just like confusing people more. But so R, that's your respiratory exchange ratio. You know, the data looks normal for the most part. He's pretty much at rest. So we can just go ahead and hit play. It's been about a minute. So now it's recording data.
So we would do our resting baseline now, essentially, if we were.
Yeah, so
for the protocol.
yeah, because it's actually recording now.
Okay.
Yeah.
If, let's say, John does some exercise and we have some reasons to think that his RER is like north of 1 or something like that,
Mm-hmm.
can we go back and just look at like the most recent trace of R, or do we just have to base it off of this value that we see right now?
Yeah, you can only do that if you're streaming through,
Okay.
looking at the raw data here on the computer,
Okay.
which we will do that and connect it that way. I just wanted to set it up this way so that we'll have him just do a couple basic things, and then we'll take it off, connect it, show you guys how to import that file, erase the database, and then we'll start a new test through the software.
Okay.
So we get both ways to run it.
What's the range on streaming then to the laptop?
It says in the manual 1,000 meters with the long range Bluetooth, but it's more like 900,
Okay.
which is still awesome, but it's a direct line of sight. I can't tell you how much that gets deteriorated by like concrete walls and buildings and stuff like that. Cool, so let's just have them maybe like walk on a treadmill, like just a casual walk for like 2-3 minutes, just so we can get a little ramp up in some of those parameters and just see him kind of baseline out after that, and we'll go.
Or we can talk about scary things.
Can I
Yeah, right.
show this is the,
Yeah, so this actually would connect to this guy over here.
Oh, that's to the Bluetooth.
Yeah, so right now, in the manual, it says you get 10 meters from the internal Bluetooth card on the computer. We're just gonna disregard that because internal Bluetooth chips are garbage. So we're always gonna be using this guy. This one has 300 meters on it. You add this one, you get 900 meters. So
Cool.
Pretty good.
Pretty good.
Yeah, so maybe just hop on it and just whatever is a comfortable walking speed for you. We'll just have you do like a stage, like 3 minutes or something. And way. But if you had something else, essentially this would be screwed into the K5, and then you would like mount it, and then it would be in front of you. So then that's when you would want to use that FiO2 extender.
Got it.
So the subject, when they start exercising really hard, they're not breathing all over the.
Is there a limit to like the length of these then too? Like if we
We do have a sampling line extender for the K5. It's mostly used for when people are testing in super cold environments, so that the extender can be next to the body. And if you're doing really long protocols, there's just more surface area to scrub humidity, so you can use super long tests. But you can use it for just regular exercise testing, and it's not going to affect your measurement, but you will obviously get way more length on your sampling line. So if you guys did find yourself doing a lot of indoor testing using the ergometers, that might be something you want to